Hi, welcome to the Sound of Science. This is Amy Myers. Today we're going to be talking about cell structures, specifically organelles. These are the parts of the cell that have a job, they have something to do. And so as we go through this, make sure on the notes that you're taking, you're writing down all of the organelles I talk about. You're writing down their jobs, their functions. Make sure you can draw a picture of them. They are going to be necessary when you're studying. You're going to have to be able to pick out the organelles from a model, from a picture. So I want to make sure that you know what they look like as well as what they do and what they are. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know is pro means no nucleus. Prokaryotes are organisms that don't have a nucleus or any other membrane-bound organelles. They don't have mitochondria, for instance. The example here is bacteria. In fact, all bacteria are prokaryotes. Ironically, all prokaryotes are also bacteria. You can almost use them interchangeably. So everything else is going to be a eukaryote. Eukaryotes like to keep their DNA nice and safe inside a nuclear membrane. We also have things like chloroplast, and we have things like mitochondria, and all of these things that are surrounded by membranes. Eukaryotes are much more advanced. They're more complicated organisms. Eukaryotes are sometimes capable of being multicellular instead of just a single-celled organism. So just something to kind of keep in mind. You are a eukaryote. Prokaryotes are bacteria. Pro means no nucleus. This is also the picture that I have that has all of the cell parts. We're going to talk about most of the ones that you see here. So if you wanted to pause the video and draw out a model of the cell, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, we're going to keep going, and you can always come back and do that later if you would like. Okay, so let's talk organelles. First thing we need to talk about is the boss, the nucleus, and everything except for prokaryotes. So these are going to be items that we're going to find, or organelles we're going to find in a eukaryotic cell. Nucleus is going to control all the cellular activities. And this is just because that's where the DNA is. DNA is really what's in charge. It's really what's in control. The ribosome, its job is to create proteins by reading RNA. I just talked about DNA, and now I'm talking about RNA. I want you to think back to when we talked about biochemistry. We talked about the macromolecules, and we talked about how the DNA is actually the instructions for the creation of proteins. Well, it does it through this intermediate manual. For instance, the DNA is copied into RNA. RNA then goes and finds a ribosome, and the ribosome is what actually is going to determine which amino acids to put in which order and is going to create the proteins. So the ribosome's job is to create proteins. I always try to remember it by thinking ribosome sounds like ribs, and ribs are meat. Protein is found in meat. Mitochondria, or mitochondrion, if we're talking about a single one. The mitochondria's job is to essentially do cellular respiration. It's going to create energy. It's going to take glucose, that's sugar, and it's going to take oxygen, and it's going to put them together. It's going to rip them apart, and it's going to create something called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which we talked about in the last unit when we talked about cellular membrane, when we talked about cellular respiration and, okay, let's try again. Okay, so we have the, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we have the mitochondrion, or mitochondria, if we're talking about more than one. Its job is to perform cellular respiration. Remember when we talked about cellular respiration and photosynthesis in the last unit with those important reactions that you needed to know. So the mitochondria is where that cellular respiration takes place. That's where we're going to take glucose and oxygen, and we're going to use it to create ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is used to allow us to store energy or use energy. That's what our cell needs for it to do its job. Cell membrane is going to work like a bouncer at a club. It's going to control what comes into the cell and what leaves the cell. I want you to pay close attention to this particular model of the cell membrane. As you look at you can see that it has two layers of, they almost look like little pins, like, with their little tails together. These are lipids. So remember we talked about in the past, we talked about the lipids. They have the glycerol and then they have the fatty acids hanging down. Well, these are lipids. And our cell membranes actually have two layers of them that sort of come together, almost like teeth in a mouth. And these lipid bilayers are really important for helping our membrane function as semi-permeable. So this is a term I don't have on the slide, but you do need to know it. Semi-permeable means that things are able to go in and out of our cell membrane, but not everything. Our cell membranes also have transport proteins. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the cells unit. When we talk about cellular transport, the cell membrane is really the star of that particular show. So we're going to talk about it again. I just wanted you to note the model and note what you see there. Okay, endoplasmic reticulum transports molecules throughout the cell. Its job is almost like a highway. It's going to carry the important materials that the cell needs from one part of the cell to another. Cool thing about the endoplasmic reticulum is there's actually two types. There's rough and smooth. The rough ER, endoplasmic reticulum, we can abbreviate it as ER, is going to have ribosomes. Remember those things we talked about before? It's going to have ribosomes stuck to it, and it makes it look bumpy. Smooth ER just doesn't have those. Remember, those ribosomes are used for making proteins, which means the ER is going to be used to move proteins as well. Always, 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 when we do a model of ER, we're going to find it right outside of the nucleus. That is just where it hangs out. Vacuole in the plant cells are going to be much larger, and they're going to contain mostly water, sometimes food. But they actually have a really important job, not only with providing storage for the cell, but also to help provide structure. Think of it like putting a basketball inside of a cardboard box. Because that basketball is full of air, you can't compress the box against the basketball, right? So that vacuole is actually going to provide some structure for the plant as well. This is also why if vacuoles are not filled with water, the cell starts to shrivel up and it actually causes wilting in the plant. Cell wall, again, think of it like that cardboard box. It's a nice rigid box surrounding the cell. It's going to help provide that structure and that support. Don't forget, plant cells also have a cell membrane. All cells are going to have a cell membrane, not just a cell wall in plants. They have both. And then, of course, the chloroplast. The chloroplast is full of membranes. It is where photosynthesis is going to take place. That's where plants are going to convert the energy from the sun, carbon dioxide, and water into glucose and oxygen, allowing us ultimately to make ATP. So, sort of keep that in mind. So, all of these are structures that are found only in the plant cell or in a different form in the plant cell. So that's it for the parts of the cells. Make sure that you go back, you know all of the parts, their jobs, how they function, and I look forward to seeing you next time.